The Galactic Military Academy on Centauri Prime had seen cadets from over 200 species pass through its halls. Commander Vextar had trained warriors with 6 arms, beings who could phase through solid matter, and creatures whose natural armor could stop plasma rounds. In his 40 years as a combat instructor, he thought he had seen everything the galaxy could offer. Then, the humans arrived. The first human cadet stepped off the transport ship with nothing but a standard duffel bag and an expression that Vextar couldn't quite read. The being was smaller than most warrior species, lacking natural weapons, armor, or any obvious physical advantages. Its skin looked thin and vulnerable, its bones appeared fragile, and it moved with what seemed like deliberate slowness compared to the lightning-quick reflexes of other species. "Welcome to the Academy," Vextar rumbled in his deep voice, his 4 eyes studying the human. "State your designation." "Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Chen, Earth Marine Corps, sir." The human's voice was steady, respectful but not submissive. There was something in those strange, forward-facing eyes that made Vextar pause. The other instructors exchanged glances. They had reviewed the human's file during the journey to Centauri Prime. Earth was a death world, they knew that much. Most species classified planets with such extreme conditions as uninhabitable. High gravity, violent weather patterns, dangerous predators, and toxic plants made Earth one of the most hostile environments in known space. But, looking at this human, it was hard to imagine how such a fragile-seeming creature could survive there, let alone become a warrior. "Very well, Sergeant Chen. You will be assigned to Combat Group 7 with the other mid-tier species. Report to Instructor KLTH for equipment assignment." Over the following weeks, Chen proved to be a puzzle that none of the instructors could solve. In academic classes, he performed adequately but not exceptionally. His tactical knowledge was solid but unremarkable compared to species with natural telepathic coordination or enhanced processing speeds. In physical conditioning, he seemed to struggle against beings with superior strength or speed. But something strange happened during the endurance trials. The Academy's standard endurance test involved a 50-kilometer march across varied terrain while carrying full combat gear. Most species completed it in acceptable time, though many required medical attention afterward. Some of the more fragile species couldn't finish at all. Chen finished the march and immediately asked if there was anything else he could do to help the medical staff with the exhausted cadets. "Remarkable recovery time," noted Dr. Yilna, the Academy's chief medical officer. His stress indicators returned to baseline within minutes. "I've never seen anything like it." Instructor KLTH shook his massive head. "It makes no sense. His muscle density is average, his bone structure appears standard for his species' mass. By all measurements, he should be among the weaker participants." But the real mystery began during combat simulations. The Academy used advanced holographic training systems that could recreate any battlefield scenario. The simulations were designed to test not just physical capability, but tactical thinking, adaptation under pressure, and leadership potential. Each scenario became progressively more difficult, pushing cadets to their breaking points. Chen's first simulation was a standard urban combat scenario. The holographic environment materialized around him, creating a damaged cityscape with multiple hostile positions. According to his file, this would be his first experience with the Academy's training systems. Most new cadets spent their first simulation learning to operate in the holographic environment. The simulation began. What happened next left the entire observation deck silent. Chen moved through the urban environment like he had been born in it. He didn't run toward objectives like many aggressive species did. He didn't rely on superior firepower like the heavily armed species preferred. Instead, he seemed to flow through the battlefield, using cover that other species hadn't even noticed, finding approach routes that the simulation designers hadn't intended. When he encountered hostile positions, his tactics were unlike anything in the Academy's databases. He would observe, wait, and then strike with precision that seemed almost supernatural. He used the environment itself as a weapon, collapsing structures to block enemy movement, redirecting water flow to create distractions, even using reflected light to blind opponents. "How is he doing that?" whispered Cadet Zoreke, a member of the warrior caste hegemony species known for their combat prowess. The most unsettling part wasn't Chen's tactical ability. It was his attitude during combat. While other species showed signs of stress, excitement, or aggression during simulations, Chen remained completely calm. His heart rate barely elevated. His movements were economical and purposeful.
He never wasted ammunition, never took unnecessary risks, never showed the battle fury that most warrior species relied upon. He fought like killing was just another job that needed to be done efficiently.
The simulation ended with Chen having eliminated all hostile positions while taking minimal damage to himself and achieving all primary and secondary objectives. His time was good, but not record-breaking. His accuracy was high, but other species had better natural aim. By individual metrics, his performance was solid but unspectacular. But he had made it look easy. The observation deck remained quiet for several moments after the simulation ended.
Finally, Commander Vexstar broke the silence. Run the analysis again. Check for system errors.
Sir, all systems operated within normal parameters. The human completed the scenario exactly as recorded.
Instructor KLTH's voice was thoughtful. Request permission to review Earth military training protocols.
I want to understand how they prepare their warriors.
Granted. But first, let's see how he performs against more challenging scenarios.
Over the following days, they escalated Chen's simulation difficulty far beyond the normal progression for new cadets. Jungle warfare, space combat, siege scenarios, asymmetrical warfare. Each environment was designed to test different aspects of combat ability.
Chen adapted to each one.
In jungle scenarios, he moved like a shadow, using natural camouflage and terrain to achieve objectives that should have required superior physical capabilities. In space combat, he demonstrated an intuitive understanding of three-dimensional tactics that took most species months to develop.
During siege scenarios, he showed patience and strategic thinking that outlasted species with superior defensive capabilities.
The most remarkable test came during a scenario designed for pack-hunting species. The simulation placed multiple cadets against a superior enemy force, requiring coordination and teamwork to succeed. Chen was paired with members of 3 different species, none of whom had worked together before. Within minutes, he had established communication protocols, identified each team member's strengths, and developed a tactical plan that utilized everyone's capabilities optimally. He didn't take command through aggression or dominance displays like many alpha species did. Instead, he simply began making suggestions and coordinating actions until the entire team was functioning as a unit. They completed the scenario with an efficiency rating that exceeded most established teams. "I want to speak with this human directly," Commander Vexstar announced during the daily briefing.
"Schedule a private meeting."
When Chen reported to the commander's office, he maintained the same calm demeanor that had become his trademark. Vexstar studied him carefully, still trying to understand what made this seemingly ordinary being so effective.
"Sergeant Chen, your performance has been noteworthy. Your instructors are curious about your training background."
"Yes, sir. I've served with the Marine Corps for 12 years, including deployments to various conflict zones."
"Conflict zones?" Chen's expression didn't change. "Earth has been experiencing internal conflicts for most of recorded history, sir. Multiple nations, resource disputes, territorial conflicts.
The Marine Corps specializes in rapid deployment and force projection in hostile environments."
Vexstar felt a chill run down his spine. "Are you telling me that your species regularly fights wars against itself?"
"Yes, sir.
Current estimates suggest Earth has been at peace for less than 8% of recorded human history."
The silence in the office stretched for several moments.
Finally, Vexstar found his voice again. "And the Marine Corps participates in these conflicts?"
"We're trained to fight in any environment, against any opponent, using whatever resources are available.
Adaptability and improvisation are core principles of our training." Vexstar's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as the implications hit him. Most galactic species had evolved past internal warfare thousands of years ago.
The idea of a species that still regularly fought itself was almost incomprehensible. But it would explain everything they had observed about Chen's combat performance.
"Sergeant, what is the primary qualification for becoming a Marine?"
For the first time since arriving at the academy, Chen's expression shifted slightly.
It might have been a smile, though Vexstar wasn't sure. "The willingness to close with and destroy the enemy, sir. Everything else can be taught." The news of Chen's conversation with Commander Vexstar spread quickly through the academy's instructor network.
The idea of a species that regularly fought itself was disturbing enough, but the implications for combat training were staggering. If humans learned to fight by actually fighting, it would explain capabilities that seemed impossible for such a physically unremarkable species.
Dr. Yilna requested permission to conduct detailed physiological studies.
I need to understand how their biology supports this level of combat effectiveness, she explained to the senior staff.
There must be something we're missing. The tests revealed surprising adaptations.
Human cardiovascular systems were remarkably efficient, designed to maintain performance under extreme stress for extended periods.
Their nervous systems showed unusual redundancy and rapid healing capabilities.
Most interesting was their brain structure, which appeared optimized for pattern recognition and rapid decision-making under pressure.
Look at these neural pathway formations, Dr. Yilna pointed to the brain scans during her presentation.
The regions associated with threat assessment and tactical planning show development patterns I'd never seen in other species.
It's as if their brains are specifically adapted for warfare.
Instructor KLTH raised a concern that had been bothering many of the staff.
If this is typical of human capabilities, why are they only sending one representative to the academy? Shen answered that question during his next private meeting with Commander Vextar.
Sir, with respect, Earth Command doesn't expect much from this program. They sent me because they figured if anyone could adapt to alien training methods, it would be a Marine. This is essentially a fact-finding mission to determine if galactic military doctrine has anything useful to offer human forces. Vextar's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement.
And your assessment so far? Your technology is impressive, sir. Some of your tactical concepts are interesting.
But most of your training assumes cooperative opponents and controlled environments. From what I've observed, most galactic species haven't had to deal with truly hostile enemies.
Explain.
Shen considered his words carefully. In your simulations, enemies follow predictable patterns. They use established tactics and fight according to recognized rules of engagement. On Earth, we've learned that real enemies don't follow rules. They use deception, break conventions, and exploit any weakness they can find.
Our training reflects that reality.
To demonstrate his point, Chen requested permission to design a simulation scenario. The academy staff agreed, curious to see what a human considered proper training.
Chen's scenario was simple: defend a position against an attacking force.
But, as the simulation began, it became clear that his definition of simple was very different from galactic standards.
The enemy forces didn't attack in waves or follow predictable assault patterns.
Instead, they used deception, false retreats, civilian disguises, and terrain manipulation. They targeted communication systems, supply lines, and medical facilities. They employed psychological warfare, environmental hazards, and adaptive tactics that changed based on defender responses.
Cadet Zoreke, the hegemony warrior, volunteered to test the scenario first.
His species was renowned for combat prowess, with natural armor plating, superior strength, and enhanced reflexes. He approached the simulation with confidence.
He lasted 11 minutes.
This is impossible, Zoreke protested afterward.
The enemy forces violated every principle of honorable combat.
They used deception, targeted non-combatants, and employed tactics that no civilized species would consider.
Shen's response was delivered in his usual calm tone. That's exactly the point. Real enemies don't care about honor or civilized behavior. They care about winning. More volunteers attempted Shen's scenario.
A telepathic species that relied on mental coordination found their abilities useless against enemies that used false mental broadcasts and psychic interference. A technologically advanced species discovered that their superior equipment meant nothing when enemies used their own technology against them.
The longest any cadet lasted was 18 minutes.
Then, Chen ran his own scenario.
Watching him work was like observing a completely different kind of warfare.
He didn't just defend the position, he turned the entire simulation into a trap. He anticipated enemy deceptions and prepared counter-deceptions. He used their psychological warfare against them, turned their environmental hazards into advantages, and consistently stayed several steps ahead of adaptive enemy tactics. When the simulation ended after 4 hours, Shen had not just survived but had eliminated all enemy forces while securing secondary objectives that other cadets hadn't even known existed. The observation deck was silent for a long time after the simulation ended.
How? Instructor KLTH finally asked. How did you know what they would do?
Because that's what I would do in their position, sir.
When you fought against creative, desperate enemies, you learn to think like they do. Commander Vextar requested a private meeting with Chen that evening. The conversation that followed would change the Academy's entire approach to combat training. Sergeant Chen, I need to ask you something directly. In your opinion, how would human forces perform against typical galactic military units?
Chen was quiet for several moments, clearly considering the diplomatic implications of his answer.
Finally, he spoke.
Sir, most galactic species appear to approach warfare like a sporting competition with established rules and recognized boundaries.
Human military doctrine is based on the assumption that the enemy will do whatever it takes to win, including things that other species might consider unthinkable. Such as
deception, improvised weapons, targeting civilian infrastructure, using captured equipment, exploiting cultural or psychological weaknesses, fighting retreats, false surrenders, asymmetrical tactics, and environmental warfare, to name a few.
Vextar felt that chill again. And human forces are trained to employ these tactics? We're trained to use whatever works, sir. The mission comes first. What about casualties? How does your species handle combat losses?
Chen's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes.
We honor our dead, sir, but we complete the mission. Human military doctrine accepts that casualties are inevitable in real combat. We train for that reality. The implications were staggering.
Most galactic species viewed combat as a last resort, approached it with careful rules of engagement, and prioritized minimizing casualties above mission success. The idea of warriors who accepted death as part of the job while maintaining complete focus on objectives was almost inconceivable.
Sergeant, hypothetically, if Earth were to face a galactic military threat, how do you think that conflict would develop?
Chen was quiet for so long that Vextar began to wonder if he would answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made the commander's skin crawl.
Sir, I hope that never happens. Most galactic species seem to be decent people living peaceful lives. But, if you're asking for a tactical assessment. Chen paused again. Galactic forces would have superior technology and numerical advantages.
Human forces would have superior adaptability, creativity, and willingness to accept casualties to achieve objectives. The outcome would depend on whether galactic forces could achieve decisive victory before human forces adapted to their technology and tactics.
And if they couldn't achieve quick victory?
Then, the galactic forces would find themselves fighting an enemy that doesn't follow their rules, doesn't respect their boundaries, and doesn't quit when things get difficult.
Human military history suggests that kind of conflict doesn't end well for anyone involved.
Vextar spent the rest of the night reviewing Chen's files and wondering if the Academy had made a terrible mistake in accepting a human cadet. By morning, however, he had reached a different conclusion. If humanity possessed military capabilities that could challenge galactic forces, it was better to understand those capabilities and potentially learn from them than to remain ignorant.
Chen represented an opportunity to bridge two very different approaches to warfare. The question was whether the Academy could handle what they were about to learn.
The next day, Vextar announced that Chen would be given expanded simulation access and permission to train other cadets in human tactical concepts. The decision was controversial among the staff, but the commander's authority was absolute. What none of them realized was that Chen's real education of galactic forces was just beginning. Chen's first official training session with other cadets was scheduled for the following week. Word had spread throughout the Academy about the human who had redesigned combat simulations and survived scenarios that challenged experienced warriors. The training hall was packed beyond capacity, with cadets from every combat group requesting permission to observe. Commander Vextar had approved the session with specific conditions. Chen would demonstrate human tactical concepts using standard Academy equipment, with full medical monitoring of all participants. If any cadet showed signs of psychological trauma from exposure to human warfare doctrine, the session would end immediately. Chen began with a simple question that would haunt many of the attending cadets for years afterward.
How many of you have killed someone? The silence in the hall was complete.
Warfare among galactic species typically involved non-lethal force, technological superiority, or quick decisive actions that minimized casualties.
The idea of personally killing opponents was considered primitive and unnecessary. In human military service, that's usually one of the first things we prepare new recruits for.
Not just the physical act, but the psychological reality of taking a life to protect others or complete a mission.
Most galactic tactics I've observed seem designed to avoid that choice. Cadet Vorthak, a member of a technologically advanced species, raised a gesture of inquiry. Surely superior technology makes such primitive actions unnecessary? Chen nodded respectfully. Technology can provide advantages, but it can also create dependencies. What happens when your technology fails, gets compromised, or faces countermeasures you haven't anticipated?
To demonstrate, Chen requested a standard tactical scenario: infiltrate an enemy facility and retrieve intelligence data. The simulation provided each cadet with advanced equipment typical of their species' technology level. Chen volunteered to attempt the scenario first, but, with one modification, he would use only basic equipment available to any species in the Academy's inventory. The simulation materialized around him, creating a heavily defended research facility with multiple layers of security. Advanced sensor networks, automated defense systems, and patrol units protected the target data. Most cadets would rely on stealth technology, electronic warfare capabilities, or superior firepower to overcome these defenses. Chen entered the facility through a maintenance shaft that the simulation designers had included as background detail, never intending it as an actual entry point. He disabled security sensors by shorting them out with improvised electrical devices made from his basic equipment. When he encountered patrol units, he didn't fight them directly. Instead, he created distractions that made them investigate false alarms, clearing his path to the objective. The most impressive part came when he reached the data storage center. The facility's main defense was an advanced AI system designed to adapt to intruder tactics in real time. Instead of trying to defeat the system electronically, Chen simply disconnected its power supply and used manual override protocols that existed in the simulation's background programming. He retrieved the data and exfiltrated through a waste disposal system, emerging outside the facility's defensive perimeter 12 minutes after entering. The observing cadets were stunned not by the speed of his success, but by the simplicity of his methods. He had ignored the facility's advanced defenses by finding approaches that didn't trigger them. He had avoided confrontation by using misdirection and environmental manipulation. He had solved technological challenges with mechanical solutions. Your equipment advantage only matters if enemies engage with your equipment, Chen explained afterward. Human tactical doctrine emphasizes finding ways around enemy advantages rather than matching them directly. Cadet Zorake requested permission to attempt the same scenario using Chen's approach. The hegemony warrior was confident that his natural abilities would allow him to improve on the human's performance. He triggered 3 separate alarm systems within the first 4 minutes. I don't understand, Zorake said after the simulation ended. I followed the same path, used the same techniques. Chen's response revealed something that would fundamentally change how the Academy approached tactical training. You followed the physical actions, but not the mindset. When you move through the facility, you move like a warrior expecting to fight. Your body language, your reaction timing, your decision patterns all reflected an aggressive approach. Security systems are designed to detect those patterns. Then, how should I move? Like you belong there. Like you're supposed to be doing exactly what you're doing. Human infiltration training teaches us to become different people for different situations. This concept of adaptive identity proved to be one of the most difficult for galactic species to understand. Most alien cultures had strong, rigid concepts of personal identity tied to species characteristics, social roles, or cultural positions. The idea of deliberately changing one's behavior patterns to match different environments was almost incomprehensible. Chen demonstrated by requesting 3 different scenarios: a diplomatic function, a maintenance inspection, and a military exercise. In each simulation, he adopted completely different movement patterns, speech rhythms, and behavioral quirks that matched the expected roles. Watching him work was like seeing 3 different people inhabit the same body. Dr. Yilna observed these demonstrations with growing fascination and concern. The psychological flexibility required for this kind of identity adaptation would be considered a mental disorder among most species. How do humans maintain stable personalities while practicing such behavioral modification? We compartmentalize, Chen explained. The job is temporary. The mission has specific requirements. When the mission ends, you return to who you really are. It's just another tool. But, perhaps the most disturbing demonstration came when Chen introduced the concept of acceptable losses. He designed a scenario where cadets had to rescue hostages from a heavily defended position.
The simulation included civilians, limited time before enemy reinforcements arrived, and insufficient resources to guarantee everyone's safety. Most galactic species approached the scenario by trying to find solutions that saved everyone. They developed elaborate plans involving technological solutions, negotiation strategies, or overwhelming force applications that would minimize casualties on all sides. Chen's approach was different. He identified which hostages had the highest strategic value, determined the minimum number that needed to be saved to complete the mission, and designed a plan that accepted the loss of the others as an inevitable cost of success. When Cadet Zoreke protested that the plan was unacceptable because it didn't save everyone, Chen's response silenced the entire observation deck. The plan saves the maximum number of people possible given the constraints. Trying to save everyone risks saving no one. Sometimes the choice isn't between good and evil. Sometimes it's between bad and worse. The psychological impact of this demonstration was so severe that Dr. Yilna called for an immediate suspension of the training session. Several cadets required counseling to process the concept of deliberately accepting casualties to achieve objectives. Commander Vextar spent that evening in his office, staring at Chen's files and trying to understand what kind of species could produce warriors capable of such cold tactical calculations. The answer came during Chen's next private meeting. "Sergeant, I need to understand something about human psychology. How do your people handle the emotional impact of combat decisions like the one you demonstrated today?" Chen was quiet for several moments before answering. "Sir, it's not that we don't feel the impact. It's that we feel it afterward, not during. In combat, you focus on the mission. You make the decisions that give you the best chance of success. You deal with the emotional cost later. And if the emotional cost becomes too great, then you get help from people who understand what you've been through. Other veterans, chaplains, counselors who specialize in combat trauma. Human society has systems in place to help warriors process what they've experienced." Vextar realized he was looking at something that went far beyond individual combat capability. Chen represented a species that had developed not just warriors, but entire social systems designed to support and maintain those warriors. The implications were staggering. "Sergeant, I want to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Do you enjoy combat?" Chen's response was immediate and unequivocal. "No, sir. Combat is a tool for achieving objectives when other methods fail. It's necessary sometimes, but it's not something to enjoy." "Then, why do you do it?" For the first time since arriving at the academy, Chen's calm facade showed a crack. His voice carried emotion that made Vextar's skin crawl. "Because someone has to, sir. There are people who use violence to harm others, who threaten innocent lives, who can't be stopped by peaceful means. Someone has to be willing to stand between them and the people they would hurt." The conversation continued for another hour, but Vextar had already heard what he needed to understand. Chen wasn't a warrior because he loved fighting. He was a warrior because he loved the people he protected more than he feared the consequences of protecting them. That night, Vextar sent a classified communication to the Galactic Defense Council. The subject line read, "Human Military Assessment, Urgent Review Required." The Academy was about to learn that some knowledge comes with a price. The Galactic Defense Council's response arrived 3 days later, marked with the highest security classifications. Commander Vextar read the encrypted message twice before calling an emergency meeting with his senior staff. "We have new orders regarding the human cadet," he announced to the assembled instructors. "The Council wants a complete assessment of human military capabilities, potential threat levels, and recommendations for future interactions with Earth forces." Dr. Yilna looked concerned. "Are they considering humanity a potential enemy?" "They're considering all possibilities," Vextar replied carefully. "Sergeant Chen's demonstrations have raised questions about human military doctrine that go beyond academic interest." The truth was more complicated than Vextar could share with his staff. The Defense Council had been monitoring Academy reports about Chen's performance, and several member species were expressing alarm about humanity's apparent military capabilities. The idea of a species that regularly fought itself, accepted casualties as part of combat operations, and trained warriors to use any means necessary to complete missions was deeply disturbing to species that had achieved peace thousands of years earlier. Some council members were suggesting that humanity should be classified as a potential military threat and monitored accordingly. Others argued that contact should be limited until human society evolved beyond its apparent primitive warfare culture.
A few extremist voices even suggested that humanity should be quarantined to prevent their violent culture from spreading to other species. Commander Vextar disagreed with all of these assessments, but he needed proof to support his position. "I want to conduct one final demonstration," he told Chen during their next private meeting. "Something that will give the Council a complete picture of human military capabilities in context."
"What kind of demonstration, sir?"
"I want you to face our best combat instructors in a scenario designed to test maximum capability. No restrictions on tactics, full access to Academy resources, and permission to demonstrate whatever you consider necessary to represent human military doctrine accurately."
Chen considered this for a moment.
"Sir, with respect, that could be dangerous for the other participants.
Human combat doctrine includes things that most galactic species would consider extreme. I'm aware of the risks. All participants will be volunteers who understand what they're agreeing to. Medical support will be standing by. The scenario will be conducted in full simulation mode with all safety protocols active. And if my performance reinforces Council concerns about human military capabilities?"
Vextar's four eyes met Chen's steady gaze. "Then, at least they'll make their decisions based on accurate information rather than fear and speculation."
The demonstration was scheduled for the following week.
Word spread throughout the Academy despite official attempts to keep it classified. By the day of the exercise, representatives from 6 different species military commands had arrived to observe, along with 3 Defense Council members who attended via secured communication links. The scenario was complex. Chen would lead a mixed team of Academy instructors in a mission to retake a captured research facility from hostile forces. The enemy would be controlled by the Academy's most advanced tactical AI, programmed to utilize adaptive strategies and maximum difficulty settings. Chen's team consisted of Commander Vextar himself, Instructor Kalth, Dr. Yilna serving as field medic, and 2 other senior instructors representing different species combat specialties. All were experienced warriors in their own right, but none had worked with human tactical doctrine. The briefing Chen gave before the mission started would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for decades afterward. "Our primary objective is to retake the facility and secure the research data. Secondary objectives include minimizing civilian casualties and preserving infrastructure.
However, those secondary objectives are subordinate to mission success.
If we have to choose between saving civilians and completing the mission takes priority." Dr. Yilna looked uncomfortable.
"Surely there must be alternatives that don't require such choices."
"There might be," Chen agreed. "But we plan for worst-case scenarios and hope for better outcomes. If you're not mentally prepared to make hard choices, you won't be able to make them when the time comes." Chen spent the next hour explaining human tactical concepts that would guide their mission: redundant planning with multiple contingencies, aggressive use of environment and improvised equipment, acceptance of calculated risks to achieve decisive advantages, and, most importantly, the willingness to escalate force levels to whatever degree was necessary for success. "The enemy AI will expect us to follow conventional assault patterns," he explained. "It will adapt to our tactics and try to counter our advantages.
Our best chance is to do things it doesn't expect, using methods that aren't in its tactical databases." The simulation began at 0800 hours Academy time. What followed was unlike anything the observing officers had ever witnessed. Chen didn't lead his team in a direct assault on the facility.
Instead, he spent the first hour conducting reconnaissance, identifying patrol patterns, communication schedules, and supply routes. He had the team collect materials that seemed unrelated to their mission: industrial chemicals from maintenance areas, electronic components from damaged vehicles, even organic material from the facility's landscaping. When they finally approached the target, Chen's plan became clear. Rather than attacking the facility directly, he had his team create multiple simultaneous distractions around the perimeter. Small explosions, communication interference, and false thermal signatures made it appear that a much larger force was conducting a coordinated assault from multiple directions. While the enemy AI redirected its defenses to counter these perceived threats, Chen led a small infiltration team through an approach route that he had identified during reconnaissance, a maintenance tunnel that connected to the facility's waste processing system.
The most remarkable part of the operation wasn't the tactical innovation, though that impressed the observers.
It was how Chen had transformed his team of individual specialists into a coordinated unit that functioned with almost telepathic efficiency. Commander Vextar found himself anticipating orders before Chen gave them, positioning himself to provide supporting fire before he realized why. Instructor KLTH discovered he was naturally covering approach routes that Chen hadn't explicitly assigned to him. Dr. Yilna was treating wounded team members and preparing medical supplies for casualties that hadn't happened yet.
"How is he doing that?" whispered one of the observing officers. "None of them have trained together before." The answer became clear as they watched Chen work.
He wasn't just commanding his team, he was reading their capabilities, psychological patterns, and natural responses, then creating a tactical framework that allowed each member to contribute optimally while supporting the others instinctively. When they reached the facility's central data core, the enemy AI attempted its final gambit, taking civilian hostages and threatening to execute them unless the assault team surrendered.
This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. How would Chen handle the classic moral dilemma that had ended many military careers and haunted warriors throughout galactic history? His response redefined how observers thought about tactical decision-making. Chen immediately accepted the AI's terms and began surrender negotiations, while simultaneously coordinating a rescue operation that utilized every team member's specialized capabilities. He kept the AI focused on surrender discussions while Dr. Yilna used her medical sensors to locate the hostages, Instructor KLTH positioned for optimal assault angles, and Commander Vexstar prepared diversionary tactics. When Shen gave the signal, the team executed a simultaneous rescue operation that neutralized hostile forces and secured all hostages within 18 seconds. The AI never had a chance to carry out its threats because it was responding to false negotiations while the real operation proceeded undetected. The simulation ended with all primary and secondary objectives achieved, 0 casualties among team members or civilians, and complete success in record time. The observation deck was silent for nearly 5 minutes after the exercise concluded. Finally, one of the Defense Council representatives spoke via the communication link. "Sergeant Chen, that was an impressive demonstration. However, we're concerned about the implications of your tactical approach for galactic security. If humanity possesses military capabilities of this level, what assurances can you provide that Earth won't become a destabilizing force?" Shen's response became one of the most quoted statements in galactic diplomatic history.
"Sir, with respect, you're asking the wrong question. Human military capability exists because we've learned that peaceful people need to be protected from those who would harm them. We've spent thousands of years fighting wars not because we enjoy violence, but because we've discovered that sometimes violence is the only thing that stops greater violence." He paused, looking directly at the camera transmitting to the council chambers.
"The question isn't whether humanity will become a destabilizing force.
The question is whether you want us as allies when you eventually encounter species that don't share your peaceful values." 6 months later, the Galactic Defense Council voted unanimously to invite humanity to join the Galactic Alliance as a full member, with Earth forces serving as the Alliance's Rapid Response and Special Operations Division. Chen completed his academy training with honors and returned to Earth as humanity's first galactic military liaison. His final report to Earth Command was brief: "They're good people who've forgotten how to fight. When something shows up that wants to hurt them, they're going to need our help."
Commander Vexstar kept Shen's academy files in his personal collection for the rest of his career.
Whenever young instructors asked him about the nature of true warriors, he would tell them about the quiet human who had taught an entire galaxy that strength without violence was possible, but only if someone was strong enough to make that choice. The academy was never speechless again. But they were forever changed by learning what one Earth Marine could do in combat when the stakes were high and the mission mattered more than personal safety. In the end, they discovered that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their tactical ability, their adaptability, or their willingness to sacrifice. It was their unwavering commitment to protecting others, even at the cost of being misunderstood or feared by those they protected. That, perhaps, was the most human thing of all.